Hey, good morning, everybody. Happy Friday. I wanted to go over a couple logistics, touch base, and share some of my own reflections on your work for the discussion too. So first of all, some of you will have noticed that I was very present during the introductions, and I actually commented on everybody's thing that they wrote, but that I was not present during the discussion too. There is a reason for that. I really did want to welcome everybody during the introductions, but as we go through the ongoing discussions, you will find that I hold back. I want you to know I read absolutely everything, and you will find comments. 90% of the time, I will give you some sort of comments about what you wrote in the gradebook comment area, but not in the discussion board. Once in a while, I will say something on the discussion board. Sometimes I feel very compelled to add something that maybe completes a thought that somebody else said, or if I've had really specific experience that counteracts something somebody said and I feel the need to show both sides, I might do that. But for the most part, what I have discovered is that when I start posting on the discussion board, people are waiting to see what I say. They're waiting for me to discuss their comments. If I don't, they somehow feel like there's something wrong with their comments. They are following my lead. If I talk about a certain thing, everybody tends to talk about that thing. So for those reasons, I pull back and I usually make your comments in the gradebook. Now, the reason for this is, one, I don't want you to follow my lead. You guys have amazing experiences, especially in a graduate class like this. You have your amazing background histories of your own, and you bring these wonderful stories and experiences and points of view. And the more diverse points of view we get, the better our own reflection on the matter, the more learning we do. So I don't want to somehow steer you. Two, I've asked you guys to comment on 3 of your classmates' work every time we have to comment. Imagine if I'd asked you to comment on 32. You would do nothing but. I actually don't have the time to comment on everybody's work in the discussion board, and also to make sure you understand why I graded you the way you did. And whatever comments I put there, it's time prohibitive. And what I have found is, in the early days, I would go in and I would also comment on maybe 4 or 5 people's things. And after a while, people would send me emails. You're always commenting on this person and that person. You've never commented on me. Don't you think I'm worth commenting on? I don't want anybody to feel that way. I do comment on everybody's work in the gradebook. So those are the logistics of what's going on in my head and why I am or am not present. And I wanted to share that with you. Now, let's get on to some of the things that I wanted to share with you about your own comments. So Goldsmith brings up this idea of bringing all stakeholders to the table, but Jesse actually asked whether that's even possible anymore in an us versus them world. And, I think that is such a great question. I happen to lean left, so, you could use the term liberal or progressive, I guess, with me. I'm not sure there are distinctions there. I haven't thought that through. But I also happen to have a lot of respect for an organization called the Cato Institute, which is a libertarian organization. And if you were to go look that up, it's cato.org, I think, and read through their stuff, you would, whichever side of the line you are on, you would probably find some stuff that they believe in that you would really appreciate, and some stuff that they believe in that you would not agree with at all. And that is the case for me. I don't agree with a lot of what the Cato Institute says, but I do agree with about a third of it. And I think to myself, if we could put down the labels, if the liberals and the libertarians were willing to come to the table and talk and find those areas, the third of the stuff that we both believe, that we could at least move forward on those things and build trust as stakeholders from different perspectives that would allow us to then dig more deeply into the kinds of issues that we have and talk them through a little bit better. So let me give you a couple of other questions to just think about when you're thinking about this question of can we come together and who should come together. Who are the appropriate stakeholders to be assembled when it's specifically community development we are looking at? Once you actually sort of make a list and bring those people to the table, we have to acknowledge that some of the people at the table automatically have more power, they have more money, they have more position, they have more control. And then the question becomes, should we give more weight to the idea of certain stakeholders over others? And I need to remind you that different stakeholders can insist on more weight. They have more clout, they have more ability, they can spend more money, that sort of thing. If you think that that's going to just keep us going in the direction we're going, then the question becomes, how do you encourage all stakeholders, no matter even if they are power heavy, to give credence and space and validity to the stakeholders who don't have the same kind of power? And I think that usually gets down to setting, first of all, everybody coming together in good faith because we're all members of the community. Second of all, understanding that if an idea or a concept or a development scheme is kind of forced down the throats of people some people who disagree with it, then there will always be pushback. So there is value in trying to work through everybody's needs, not just the group who have the power to get their needs no matter what, because when everybody feels like the community reflects their own needs, the solutions that you came up with are going to last longer. People aren't going to fight against them. And finally, to get to that place, usually before you even get started, the group will come together and agree on some rules. I will give you one example. Rules or standards. If, for example, a standard might be nothing we do is going to create a situation in which people who don't have enough money are going to be forced from their home. So whatever you do then, if it looks like it's going to force people from their homes, either because of property tax rise or whatever, you're going to have to look for antidotes to counterbalance that so that those people can stay. So those are measurements or standards that you kind of, every idea that you have, you hold it up against a standard that you've agreed on in advance and say, is this going to ruin our standard? And if so, is there a way to counteract it? And if not, you're going to throw it out and keep looking for another solution. What about rules? So I have participated in a lot of community facilitated discussions, decision-making things. Some of them last for years because these issues, as you can imagine, are very complicated. And one rule that I just won is that everybody has a veto power, but you can't just say no. If you are going to come forward and veto, you have to actually bring back an alternative idea that takes into account what you know about everybody else's position at the table. In other words, you can't just bring back the thing that works for you, or else your veto won't stick. You have to bring back a thing that takes into account the needs of others around the table, and that's pretty hard. But one of the things it does is it forces you to go talk to the people around the table about your idea, how it would impact them, listen to them, and then work together to come up with an idea that will satisfy everybody. And you do that a few times when you have to say no, and pretty soon you really understand everybody's positions. And if done in good faith, I'm not saying there's no tension, but you can actually get to a solution that most people can get on board with. Thanks for that question, Jessie. Okay, so Bethany was discussing a number of programs that just end up being failures. I like to think of all social innovation as social experimentation. Everything is just somebody or some group's idea, right, before they become programs. And when we implement an idea, we are sort of throwing something up against the wall to see if it works. And I'm not saying that we don't think it through as carefully as we can and we don't try to plan for contingencies, but when do you ever do something for the first time and not have something unexpected happen, right? So they're all just big social experiments. So what I would ask you is to think about what could be done that would help either reduce the uncertainties that come with innovation, and I guess it should be and, not either or, it should be and. What could you do that would help reduce the uncertainties that come with innovation, and how could you plan for dealing with uncertainties that are certain to come up? One of my favorite ways is a method that I borrow from the natural resources discipline, and that's something called adaptive management. You get your agreement on standards, what your goals are before you create and implement a program. And you agree that whatever you decide to do, you're going to base it on science or data rather than strictly politics or feelings or how we've done things in the past. And then once you've got those agreements, you basically set benchmarks where you're going to stop and say, okay, we've done this and this, now let's check. Are doing those two things still taking us in the direction of our goals, or are we veering off? If we're veering off, we need to recalibrate, or we need to say, okay, what do we need to do differently to get back into line with our goals? If they're still keeping us with our goals, we continue on with the plan. That's adaptive management. So what you see there is you get agreement on the goals first. You get agreement on what kind of data or science you're going to be collecting so that you can demonstrate with some factual knowledge whether or not what you're doing is taking you to the goals. And then you adapt if you find that what you thought was going to work isn't working the way you planned. So thanks for that question, Bethany. I hope those were some helpful ideas. All right, Tana raised the issue of competitiveness in funding, and yes, there are a lot of nonprofits and others out there that are competing for the same funds. And I guess what I really want to suggest here is we're going to be talking about community innovations, but the skills that we learn to talk about innovation in communities should also be put to work when we're talking about funding. Why aren't we being more innovative in funding? So let me just start sort of at square A. A lot of nonprofit or NGO organizations use a method called revenue accounting. Revenue accounting means they keep track of how much money is coming in and they keep track of how much money is going out because they need to make sure they have enough money coming in to cover what they have to pay for. And that's okay, but it really isn't that useful. The reason NGOs and nonprofits do that is because they get money from different sources like donations and stuff. It's not directly tied to, for example, like in a private business where you have a widget and you sell the widget and you need to bring in enough money from the sale of each widget to not only cover the cost of producing and marketing and distributing it, but also extra, right, for that profit. Because of the way for-profit businesses need to make sure that the sales price covers the cost, for-profit businesses use something called cost accounting, which means they keep track of all the costs of doing business. They apportion even percentages of people time, equipment use, the rent for their facilities, whatever, to each different thing that they're making. They know exactly what things cost. I strongly recommend that if you are in a nonprofit who does revenue accounting, that you change over to cost accounting. It will show you where you are spending and using the most money and the most time. You may think you have a sense of that, but if you are revenue accounting, you probably don't. And I'm going to give you a quick example. There is an organization, Tohono Chul Park in Tucson. It is a botanical garden. And the first time they asked me to consult, I asked them if they were cost or revenue accounting. They were revenue accounting. I made them go back. Well, I didn't make them. I asked them if they would be willing to go back and do cost accounting before we got together to do their summer retreat, and they agreed to do it. It entailed, interestingly enough, making a lot of assumptions about how people were and were not spending their time from people who had not been, like they're not lawyers, they're not keeping track of their billable hours, right? But one of the things that they noticed is that one of their biggest fundraisers was actually costing them more to produce and put on when they took into account people time and so forth than it was bringing in. And that made people who thought they were supporting the organization actually feel pretty awful and angry, and they had to work that through. But once we understood that that particular fundraiser was not actually making money, we were able to focus on it, whereas nobody had been even looking at it before because they just assumed that it was a good deal. Now, let me tell you what I'm talking about so that this will make some sense. They're a botanical garden, and one of the things that they do is they propagate indigenous plants, and they have a plant sale twice a year. The plant sale was bringing in, I can't even remember how much, but it was something like $40,000 each time, but they were not keeping track of how much it actually cost. In the beginning, they were just small, and they were selling the plants that they propagated themselves, and it cost them about 11 cents per plant to propagate these plants themselves. And most of that expense is people time, because after they've propagated and they're collecting seeds and so forth, it really costs them very little to, maybe some organic materials and fertilizer or something, but it costs them very little to propagate the plants other than the people time. But after a while, their sale got so busy and so popular with the community that they didn't have enough plants to sell from their own propagation. So they began buying plants from other nurseries to, supplement what they had. The plants that they were buying cost them, even those little tiny things, they cost them between $3 and $7 a piece. And when they added up how much it was costing them to buy all those plants and then resell them, it was actually costing them more. They were making up for the money with a restaurant that they had on property, but nobody really realized that. Once we realized that, we were able to actually look at their nursery and ask ourselves, what could we do to reduce the number of plants that we had to buy? And they have plenty of space, and they decided that they would enlarge their propagation beds. Well, they had never even thought about enlarging their propagation beds, because to do that was going to take quite a large sum, a chunk of money all at once that they didn't have. But when they understood what was really going on, they knew they had to do something, because they couldn't keep losing money doing this event. And so what the executive director did was to go to one of their funders and say, could you kindly do a one-time major gift, and we will name this new garden after you. But by doing this one-time major gift, you will be setting up the park for years and years to come, because what we need right now is to invest those upfront costs, and the donor agreed to do it. And so now their plant sales are actually making them all the money that they hope that they are, and they are having to purchase, if anything, far fewer plants. So that is an example of why it's important to be innovative. And even though cost accounting is not innovative in the private sector, it's kind of innovative in the nonprofit sector. So I guess what I'm going to suggest for you guys who are worrying about money is that you think about innovation as well as in funding as well as programming. And at the bottom of this slide, you will see that I have mentioned two articles. They're both Stanford innovation, Stanford something innovation something, I can't remember, but if you just Google Stanford and 10 nonprofit funding models, and then Stanford and finding your funding models, you will find information that will give you some ideas about how to set up funding, different kinds of models for setting up funding for the work that nonprofits and other organizations, community groups do that may be different or innovative for what you are working on, to see what fits for you and what might actually help reduce the amount of competition for funding that Tana was referring to. Okay, the words we choose. Carmen noted that Goldsmith used the term welfare moms and was kind of miffed because he obviously avoided using the term deadbeat dads. And I'm going to go a little bit off topic here to acknowledge the power of language. And I really do believe that, and I think it's really visible if you just look at the politics around us right now, when we call people names, when we choose not to acknowledge their humanity, when we categorize people negatively, we are setting up a situation in which there's going to be so much tension and conflict that we may never be able to mutually resolve our issues. So I like to use the example from a guy named, oh my goodness, I'm going to forget. His name is Ellis. I can't remember if that is Eddie Ellis. There you go. Sorry. He was a man who was in prison for a really long time, and he was actually not guilty, and they released him. But he was in jail for a long time, and he found that regardless of what his situation was, himself and every ex-con, which is exactly what he wouldn't like to hear me say, people who used to be in prison was experiencing was that they were having a terrible problem being accepted back as valuable members of the community. And here's what the idea is. When we are not called mad dogs, animals, predators, offenders, and other derogatory terms, we're referred to as inmates, convicts, prisoners, and felons, all terms devoid of humanness, which identify us as things rather than as people. We are asking people to stop using these terms in an effort to assist our transition from prison to our communities as responsible citizens and to create a more positive human image of ourselves. We are asking everyone to stop using these negative terms and simply refer to us as people. People currently or formerly incarcerated, people on parole, people recently released from prison, people in prison, people with criminal convictions, but people. And my last question for you is, what would it be like for you if you were only known for the worst thing you've ever done? Oops. What do we got here? Oh, this one should just disappear. All right, I see that I made a second slide where I actually put the citation. Good for me. All right, this is actually a video of Eddie Ellis having this conversation. I'm not going to play it for you right now, but I strongly suggest that if you're interested in this topic of the impact and power of words, that you go watch it. Okay, several of you raised the American dream, and I just want to challenge you to think about this whole idea of the American dream. If you had to put the American dream into your own words, what would you say that it is? And I really think that the original idea of the American dream and how many people see the American dream now is not the same. I don't know if it's because our values have changed or if it's because we think different things are possible now or impossible. So it's important to think about who actually crafted the original narrative of the American dream, and actually how well did that original dream reflect the multiplicity, the diversity of voices and lives in America. And I would contend that it really didn't. There are identity groups or social groups, whatever you want to call them, who've actually never had the opportunity to live the American dream in our country. And the American dream, when it was first discussed, wasn't necessarily even meant to include those people. What about people from other countries? Do they have the right idea about America? Look, I don't know about you, but I and my family, my grandmother was an immigrant. My mom's a first-generation American. I'm a second-generation American. I know that my family escaped from, half my family escaped from Nazi-infested Poland, and many died there. And my father's side of the family escaped a little bit earlier from Tsarist Russia because of anti-Semitism as well. So we came here because it was a place where we felt that we could live without persecution. If you were going to rewrite the American dream today, how might it be different than the American dream that we think of as the historic or traditional? And I have also given you an article here, Scotty Hendricks, What the American Dream Is versus What It Originally Meant. If you're interested in looking at some more of that, check it out. All right, I got a little thrown there by my phone going off. All right, community. One of the articles that I have given you here, I've just given you 2 articles, these are both about what is actually community and how are ideas of community changing. One of these articles is just a series of musings about why humans need community for human resilience, and the other is actually about how we are changing our perceptions of community. I really strongly recommend that you take a look at both of these articles because they are in conflict. If we don't retain the resilience that the communities of old, the old idea of community offers us, what does that portend for the future of humanity? I strongly urge you to think about that. All right, and here's my last one. This is getting a little long. It's going on half an hour, and I apologize, but you can hopefully stop and start and take it up when you need to. I wanted to talk about root causes of the problems because a lot of you were talking about different causes, and I want to just reiterate that problems emerge from within systems. A lot of things going on in systems, a lot of unexpected outcomes from the way elements of systems interact. We kind of getting at that earlier when I talked about all programs, new ideas, policies being social experiments. We can't anticipate everything that is going to come out of them. That is true with systems too. There are a lot of different things going on. For example, in a community or in a political system, we don't always understand all the factors and how they impact each other. Because of that, it makes it sometimes very difficult to figure out how to dismantle problems and make them go away, to transform them into something better. What you've got in front of you is a picture of a table that has a zillion legs. If you think about the problem as being the tabletop and it being held up by a zillion legs, the question is, which legs do you have to dismantle for the table to fall over? And most of my students want to dismantle the most egregious things that they see. So let's just let's think of a recent example. I've personally been very disturbed by the children being taken away from their parents at the border, and I think that what most people would say is, who, if they agree with me, some of you may not, but is that we just must immediately stop taking parents away from children away from parents at the border, and that would fix that problem. But I think if we look at this more broadly, we will see that the reason children are taken away from parents at the border, I mean, I'm making this up, but it may have something to do with, I don't know what it has to do with, but perhaps the facilities where they throw the parents aren't seen as appropriate for kids. I don't even know, actually. It could just be cruelty. But if it's cruelty, then you've got to look at which of these legs represents cruelty. At any rate, the point is you just have to asking why. Why is this happening? Why is this happening? Why is this happening? And sometimes the main problem that we have isn't that easy to stop. I think the example of taking children away from their parents isn't a good example for this, but there are, let's take the example of kids not graduating from school or something. If you try to figure out what the main reasons are why kids aren't graduating from school, you will find a whole bunch of different factors. And sometimes the factors that seem the ugliest or seem the worst are nevertheless the most entrenched and the hardest to uproot. And I guess what I'm trying to suggest, and doing it very poorly, is that there are so many factors. You can't always uproot the one that seems like the biggest problem. Sometimes you have to look for the factors that are the easiest to change and begin there and start dismantling all of the legs that are easy to take off. And pretty soon, if you've taken off enough of the easy legs, the table will start to wobble in spite of the fact that a major thing is still entrenched. And by doing that, you make it easier to then remove the bigger, worse problems. I don't know that I did that very well. I may come back and try again another time, but at any rate, that's it for now, and I'm sure you're glad. Hang in there, you guys. This is a fast-moving class. I know it's a lot of work. It will be over before you know it. Have a great weekend.